today. Now we'll try to answer any questions you have.
President Galligan, this is Catherine Manuel with the LSU Reveille. My first question is, the report spoke to there needing to be a sense of public accountability. Can you clarify what this means, what that may look like in the future for the university?
Yeah, I think public accountability means, one, we have to own up to the mistakes that we have made in the past. We have to apologize for the mistakes that we have made in the past and the damage that we have done. And it also means that as we go forward, and I think in the board meeting right before we broke, Scott Schneider said this very, very well, we have to publicly and transparently hold ourselves accountable. So we have to take the 18 recommendations that Hush Blackwell has made and other things that we are doing. We have to put them, I'll be as simple as this, we've got to put them on a public checklist, and we've got to say, here's what we're going to do, here's when we're going to do it by, and then y'all can look at that checklist and say, okay, they did this, they did this, they did this. Why is this one delayed? So I think it's got to be a public, transparent process. The report is 148 pages long. That it's available. You can now read it. So we've got to be more transparent in this work than we have ever been before.
Michael Cobble, WBRZ Channel 2 here in Baton Rouge. This question might be for you and for Scott. With respect to everyone in this room, and not unlike many colleges across the South, the head football coach at a university has enormous power. What steps are you prepared to enact to implement a system of checks and balances and accountability for powerful coaches within your athletic department?
And I think not just within our athletic department, but across our entire campus. And Scott Schneider can speak to this as well. I think it may be the 18th recommendation, and the 18th recommendation is this applies to everyone. So we have to be absolutely clear that each and every one of us is subject to the same rules, the same reporting requirements, and the same standards of behavior.
Got one in the back.
Good morning, Dion Guillory with NBC 33 Fox 44. These 18 recommendations, and I know you mentioned just how many pages this thing is, 148 pages. It's a lot to go through. But is there a timetable in trying to reach these benchmarks? And if so, what is that? And with the transparency being mentioned several times through this, how are you going to let people know that this is happening?
There isn't a timetable yet, but I will say that creating the Office of Civil Rights in Title IX will happen immediately. And as soon as Jane Cassidy can distribute her current responsibilities to her successors, she will be on the job. And I expect that may be next week. And again, what we will do is we will post the recommendations in a comprehensible fashion. There are 12 pages in here in a shorter way. And we'll say what we're gonna do, when we're gonna do it, and we will update. Certainly, it may change, like our roadmap to diversity. As we discuss and as we see other things we should do, we'll add those things to the list.
One more.
Yes,
Yes.
Abby Rocha with NBC and Fox in Baton Rouge. Part of the investigation entailed that victims were saying that they were having trouble getting their reports, and they were saying that the university was not complying with getting documentation. Will there be changes with that when it, talking about transparency?
One of the recommendations, and I'm going to ask Scott to help me with this one, but one of the recommendations with the detail of it, one of the recommendations is to improve our record keeping. And certainly, I think General Counsel Winston DeQueer Jr., who's with me, would agree. We need to improve our record keeping and the way we track things. Scott, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just be brief. The record keeping is a problem. We highlight it throughout the report. I'd also say, and what I'd ask you to do is kind of put yourself in the position of a 18, 19-year-old student who's been sexually assaulted and is now in this process. it's a difficult process under any set of circumstances, but one of the things that is critical in making a student feel supported in that process is that they're getting something in the way of regular communication from the Title IX office. And you just don't, at this point, LSU did not have the staffing to do that. So one of the recommendations we've made as well is, and this is what peers around the country do, they need somebody who can basically be a case manager. And in addition to, just making sure the investigation is going well, is touching base with them to tell them what the status is, checking on them, things like that. So I think those two, the record keeping needs to be fixed, but you also need personnel who can have that regular communication with students.
Chris Nakamoto with WBRZ TV. The Les Miles report that was released yesterday basically said that we do not believe under the existing law and the terms of his contract that there was cause to terminate his contract because student number 2 was adamant about her identity not being revealed. So does this mean essentially that a complaint can't be verified without unmasking a victim?
Scott?
Yeah, so I'm going to be careful, but well, I won't be careful. I'm not a big fan of the investigation report. I do think there are ways in a situation like that that we could allow a victim who is concerned about confidentiality to proceed in a confidential way so that you do a full-blown investigation, but it is a challenging situation.
You should be good. You should be good to go. Does he want to introduce?
Is he back?
We're back.
Sorry.
Sorry, Scott, we lost connection. But
Okay, Scott, we lost you you thought there might be ways.
Yeah, there are definitely ways in a situation, and I will say they are complicated now with the Trump Title IX regulations, but there are steps that you could do to do a full-blown investigation while at the same time providing for confidentiality. Now, I will say, look, if you end up, a coach is unhappy that they end up getting disciplined, it is a possibility, and I actually defend lawsuits like this, that the coach could sue the school and sue the young woman and for defamation. And in that sense, it might not be confidential, but in the investigation process, no, we think there are steps that you could take to maintain that student's confidentiality.
Hey, I also have a question about the internal investigation that came out yesterday. So part of it was, and I actually want to direct it to the athletic director. Part of what was mentioned was that Coach Miles wanted student workers who were women, who were young, fit, and blonde, and it was never really addressed whether LSU complied with that request, whether you did hire people who were young, fit, and blonde. So I want to know if there are any physical characteristics that cause people to get hired that work in the athletic department, student workers.
I can't answer to Coach Miles because I wasn't here, but the answer is no, we currently do not do that.
Okay. And the other question related to that is, One of the reasons the Les Miles investigative report, in my opinion, didn't come out sooner is because LSU took great pains to make sure it was outside of the public record in some ways. The law firm sent the report to Coach Miles' lawyer, and it's pretty well detailed how that was kept, out of the public record. Are you aware of that happening in other cases at the university? And is that something that's going to happen going forward?
I'm not aware of that happening in any other cases. And I will say that I learned of that investigation during this process. I would say maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago was the first time I learned about it. No, I do not think we will do that going forward.
So that's not standard practice?
Not to me, it's not standard practice.
Austin Kemper, WAFB. The two members of leadership that were named and disciplined, are those the only two that are still in active leadership at the university that are being disciplined, or will it be future discipline that's considered for other members who played a role in what happened?
We'll consider the whole report. We'll go back through and we'll look at the whole report, and we'll make decisions accordingly. Those are the decisions that we've made to date based on the report, based on the investigation.
Any idea how long that might take?
I don't think it's going to take very long.
Rob?
Yeah, Ron Higgins, Tony Greg. In all these cases, the football players have, alleged rapes, whatever. How does the head football coach not know about this? Is he that insulated where nobody tells him? Because football coaches usually have a pretty good idea of what's going on with their football team, through their assistant coaches. Any explanation about that?
I would think, Scott, can you speak to the investigation on that as to anything you found regarding knowledge?
No, I think we need to be careful here. I don't think there's any, on a lot of these, Coach Ogeron in particular, I think knew of these things, but what you want is, you don't want the coaches involved in these investigations. Yes, they should know about it, but we don't want the athletics department involved in these investigations. What we want is athletics to be out of it entirely and allow the Title IX office to do its investigation. And so, the question about, did the Coach Ogeron, for instance, know about some of these incidents? You'll see in the report, the answer is yes, but those in part were being handled sometimes okay, sometimes really not okay by the Title IX office. But you don't want, one of the lessons from the Baylor situation was, you don't want athletics to be overly involved in these cases for a variety of reasons. The biggest one being, you might be really good at, coaching football. I guarantee you're not going to be good at doing these sorts of investigations. So I wanted to reframe it a little bit. Yes, there definitely, he knows, but you don't want them to have an active role in that process.
One more question, if I may. The tennis coaches themselves, obviously there's plenty of stuff in here where there was conversations with the parents themselves. Why were they disciplined?
I think you should read the report. The report speaks for itself on that matter, in part on what determinations Hush Blackwell made regarding knowledge and credibility.
A question for Mr. Steiner. This is Glenn Gilbo from USA Today, Louisiana. Did you have a say in the discipline for Vern Josberry and Miriam Seeger? Did you make a recommendation? Do you think that's enough discipline for those two? Doesn't seem like a lot.
What I said in the report is, I think in those two cases, discipline was appropriate, and the call about what the appropriate discipline is going to be left to the leadership of the university. And I will say, from my perspective, I would encourage you to read the whole report, but there's some perspective there. And I think in all cases, I'm not a big fan of offering up people as sacrificial lambs. And I think in each instance, folks need to be treated fairly. And on the Vern Josberry piece, somebody asked me a question sometime this week about he's the most, I don't know Verge Osbury from anybody. But I think in Verge Osbury's case, to be fair, the extenuating factors that we talk about in the report should be considered. Ultimately, it's up to the university to decide what they think is an appropriate discipline.
President Galvin, what was your thoughts on that discipline? Did you make the final decision on that?
Yeah, I did make the final decision on that. And my thoughts were that I had an obligation to be as fair to everyone as I possibly could, and that I tried to be as fair as I possibly could. And if you'll forgive me, I will read again from page 137 of the report. And what page 137 of the report says is, throughout this report, we have stressed that in many ways, the employees tasked with these important responsibilities were not served well by the leadership of the university. Institutional policies were unclear. Edicts were issued by supervisors that conflicted with policy. Employees were overburdened with vast institutional roles and not provided with appropriate resources. Calls for additional resources went unheeded. Concerns were not responded to, etc. As part of this review, we have interviewed several employees who acknowledged making mistakes and emotionally shared that they were trying their absolute best under exceptionally difficult circumstances. And I would also point you to footnote 171 on page 70.
All right, we have a few more. Michael, Catherine, Mark, and then we'll get it back over here to Chris. Around the room.
The discipline aspect that you mentioned at the end in there was rather vague. And I understand the processes that are now in line and the desire to remove athletics from the equation, but it is not in these teams' best interest to report some of these cases. So how will you ensure that those cases or those instances and those investigations start? Is there a framework there? Because it seems, again, it's going to be incumbent upon the victim to start the process.
Yeah, I think as many of these questions, that's a great question. And first and foremost, there has to be training. People have to understand what their responsibilities are. They have to absolutely know, call the Title IX coordinator, file a report. So it has to be clear and people have to be trained. But the most important thing, I think, and this is going to take time, is culture. And the culture has to be, we do not accept domestic and sexual violence at LSU. That is not who we are. I love this institution, and I love it mostly because of its people. And we failed our people in this regard. So we have got to change the culture. And as we go forward, we're going to work with STAR, and we're going to work with our own community to make those cultural changes so that, as you say, it's maybe not in the best interest of whatever the organization I'm a part of is to report this, but it's my personal responsibility to report it. And the culture is that if I don't report it, I can't sleep at night. All right? It might be there's going to be discipline and this is going to happen, but I can't sleep at night. So we've got to change the culture.
I have two quick questions, if that's all right. The first, did the athletics department continue the policy of funneling Title IX complaints through Marion Seeger after Woodward took over as AD in April 2019? I'm not entirely sure who could answer that.
I think, and Scott can help me out. I'm not sure it was overnight, but the athletic department has definitely changed that process. That Miriam Seeger is no longer the person reported to. Now, as you will see in the report, there were several communications to athletics employees that you report to Miriam Seeger. That was wrong, and now we do the right thing. They don't report to Miriam Seeger. Miriam Seeger was placed in a very difficult situation as a result of that. So that's changed, and I don't know, Scott, if it changed immediately, but it's definitely changed. That's not the way it is anymore. But it's also essential, I think, to point out that it isn't just athletics, that there are other instances in the report where, for instance, a dean wrote to the folks in the dean's college, report Title IX issues to me, not to Title IX. No, Title IX.
And my second question, kind of a follow-up to that, is you're speaking about page 137. I briefly looked over it before asking, but I'm just going to ask for clarity. You mentioned that edicts were instituted by supervisors and they conflicted with policy. Was upper administration aware of this, and how did this happen if that conflicted with the Title IX policy in place?
Yeah, I wish I could answer that. Scott Schneider might be able to answer that. And I don't want to sound like I'm passing the buck, but I wasn't aware of it because I was not in this position at that time. I was responsible for the law center. But Scott, I don't know if you can comment on that.
It was one of the, when you do these reviews, some of them are really boring. That was like an eye-opening moment. Like, how in the heck, how does this happen? That the reports are going directly to Miriam Seeger. And I think the thing, and I did mention this briefly, that was just remarkable to me was one of those emails comes out in response to what was going on at Baylor. And as I said before, a lot of lessons to learn from the Baylor case. The biggest one is you can't allow athletics to basically decide what gets forwarded to the Title IX office. It needs to go directly to the Title IX office. So I will say, there were conflicting accounts given to us. There was some discussion that there was a meeting with the former president where he told everybody everything needs to go directly to the Title IX office and that this was in violation of that edict. But I know when we got it, it was one of these moments where I was just a bit beside myself.
Mr. Schneider, did the former athletic director put Miriam Seeger in this bad position? And overall, what was your view on former athletic director Joe Oliva, how he approached and maybe contributed to the culture?
Well, boy, it's such a great question. There's no question with respect to the first one that he was the one that put Miriam Seeger in that position. I mean, the edicts, the emails come from him. I have very mixed feelings. To me, I don't want to overstate the significance, but I don't want to understate the significance of it either. I continue to question had we handled the Les Miles situation a little differently, the impact that would have had on the culture of the athletics program in terms of what we tolerate, number one, and that reporting is valued. And on that score, we were able to find some emails that Mr. Oliva drafted and that I think were absolutely correct, that were recommending that the university decide to let him go. So I think his instincts on that were the correct instincts. I don't know exactly how that we ended up with the decision we ended up, but the edict for Miriam, in essence, to be kind of a choke point for whether the report gets to the Title IX office was his, and I think it's a problematic practice.
Do any of the LSU contracts with executives, administrators, coaches have morals clauses in them that would require immediate firing?
Yes. Winston, this is general counsel.
The contracts do have moral clauses in them, but they allow the university discretion to determine what discipline should be issued.
Did Les Miles' contract have a morals clause in it? Did you not claw back what we paid out to him?
Yeah, I can't answer the specifics of Les Miles' contract just because I don't. I've been here a year and I can't say that.
Can you answer that, Mr. Gallen?
I can't. I have not reviewed Les Miles' contract.
Ms. Nakamura?
I imagine though that you have piqued my curiosity.
Chris Nakamoto again with WBRZ. Along those same lines with the contract, there was a catch-all for any suspension or termination for cause provided in the employment agreement to, quote, comport himself at all times in accordance with the highest moral, ethical, and academic standards. Again, LSU says they could not do anything because the victim did not want to be identified. Scott said a moment ago, there are provisions and ways that they can protect victims. Can you explain what those provisions are on how to protect these victims and could Miles potentially have filed a defamation suit against this victim, naming her?
Scott, if you can take the part on the things that can be done to protect, that would be helpful. And the answer to the question is yes, certainly. It would be conceivable that a defamation suit could be filed.
Yeah, again, at the time, there are new regulations in place from the Trump administration around Title IX. So what you can do to protect confidentiality now is different. And for what it's worth, I think those regulations, there are a lot of problems with them. At the time, no, I mean, we could have, gone to Les Miles, said, we're not going to identify who this person is, but these are the allegations, and just investigate it that way. When that gets challenging because with respect to your second question, it's pretty clear to me, and this has become a really sad trend nationally, that people who come forward and make these sorts of allegations end up getting sued in defamation and have high-powered, aggressive attorneys and all that sort of stuff. She may have had reluctance actively participating, given how involved and aggressive perhaps counsel was for Coach Miles. But there are ways you could, certainly before the 2020 regs, to protect confidentiality and anonymity as much as possible.
The question is actually for Scott Woodward, if I may. Scott, if you could speak to your athletic department's compliance here, and obviously cooperation going forward, your belief that you're going to get it right in the future, and your belief in your two employees that were made.
Yeah, it's absolutely imperative. And that's the most important thing that we can take away today, Michael, is that we have to get it right going forward. And as an alum and as an athletic director, I'm embarrassed about what's happened in the past and what we've done, not protecting in these situations, and getting it right is important. We want to review the past and accept the past, but the most important thing is for us to get it right going forward. And that's where we are. And I have great confidence in both Merriam and Verge that they will. They've accepted it, and they will understand how we do it. And they're wonderful employees that have helped dozens and dozens of not only student athletes, but general students in this place. They pour in and out of their offices for help all the time, and they're good people, and they were put in untenable situations, and for that, I'm looking forward for them to reflect and to learn and to accept what's happened, and us be better going forward, because we have to.
I just kind of want to ask a question similar to Stone's question in the meeting. I mean, I know that the athletic department, and I don't know about the rest of the campus, but you all are bringing in an outside contractor to talk to people at least 2 or 3 times a year about how to handle complaints like this. At least one, and you're bringing in speakers, and you're bringing in people to talk about this. So I guess I'm not, having not read through the whole report, I guess I'm not understanding how it could be so confusing to know if you're having training 2 or 3 times a year outside of what the university is doing, to know when you should mandatory report. Are we not going to have that training anymore in athletics? Because clearly it wasn't very effective. I mean, or maybe it was, and you can explain that.
I can at least, I think, begin to explain it, and my explanation, beginning of it, really comes from this report, and it comes from what I have learned over the last 3 months. And one thing is, I really would encourage you to read, because, and the part of the question about training is, read the part of the report about training, about different language in PM 73 from in emails that are sent to people telling them to report, to training slides that have different statements of being to a basic responsibility to report that it's vague. So I can see all those things would lead to confusion, even if I said report in a meeting and it's your responsibility. When you go to look it up, when you go to verify it, it is very, very confusing. And I would also say, and this gets back to this culture question, which is the huge question of all. If the culture's not right, if the tone isn't set from the top, then whatever you hear in training can be undermined by what you see going on around you. And those are really the things that we have to change if we're going to have a safer campus and we're going to do our best to eradicate domestic and sexual violence from our campus. So I think there was a lot of confusion, there was inadequate staffing, and there were not clear messages about how important this was.
But should you need training to know if someone says they punched or hit their girlfriend, that maybe something should be done about that? Or if someone you coach comes in and says they've had their ribs broken by their boyfriend, I don't know. I wonder. I feel like people out in public are going to be like, do you need training to know that that's something that's aligned?
I think, again, I would say, I hear what you're saying clearly, but I would also say the messages were not at all consistent, nor was it clear what one's own personal responsibility was within the system. But I appreciate the viewpoint. That's part of what makes this so hard.
One of the questions we had when this investigation was first announced, Scott, you have a connection to LSU. So I guess the big question for us is, how was this truly an independent review when you yourself have a connection to the university?
For the record, my connection to the university is my daughter goes there. So I think the report speaks for itself. It's as independent as there's no question about, from my standpoint, that I answered every question and dealt with every issue. First off, with absolutely no pressure from the university other than to tell the truth, and I did that.
Anybody else have a question? All right, last one we got Abby from WPLA.
Many of the victims that have come forward have faced backlash, emotional distress. Is the university doing anything to make it right with them?
I think first and foremost, we apologize to them, and we're very, very sorry for what they went through and for what they had to go through. And I will continue to express all of our heartfelt apologies to them. As I said, I love LSU, and what I love about it are our people, and we did not adequately support these people, the survivors who have come forward. And I also will say again, I thank them for coming forward. I don't think I can really appreciate how courageous it was, but it's incredibly courageous that they did come forward. And if they hadn't come forward the way they did, we wouldn't be here today. This is a sad day for us in facing up to our past and to what happened. But today is also a day for us. I use the line, we can draw a line and we can measure our progress forward. And the progress we make will be built in large part upon the courage and strength of those survivors who came forward. So I'm both grateful to them, and with all my heart, I apologize.
Yeah, I'll say a couple of things about that too. Meet with them, you realize how exceptionally difficult it was for these students to make reports to begin with. I mean, think of, Darius Geis at the time is probably, if not the most popular person in Louisiana, he's way up there. To have the bravery to come forward with a report just speaks volumes. This won't be maybe popular, but I also need to, I think the press and the story, that they participated in that shone a light on this. The USA Today, for the most part, when you go through what they put in their reporting, and there are a couple of things where I go, I'm not sure I agree, but for the most part, they were pretty spot on. And those journalists, I think, deserve some credit as well.
Got one more from WBRZ.
This is a probably an open-ended question, and I think I might know the answer, but is the NCAA involved in any of this? And do you anticipate them becoming involved?
The NCAA is not involved in this at this point. I do not anticipate them being involved in this, but if they are, we will fully and open, we'll open our books and we will fully cooperate in any investigation that they have.
All right, thank you, everybody. If you have any follow-up, you guys know how to reach me. The report's posted on the Title IX review site. If you got emailed this morning, these guys have Board of Supervisors meeting to finish up. So please just reach out if you have any follow-up questions as you read through the report. Thank you.
Can you go ahead and pin that or spot like that? So, yeah.